Donald Trump knew, Donald Trump lied, and Donald Trump covered it up.
It goes through air, Bob. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. It's not just old young people, to plenty of young people. I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
We now know the President of the United States lied to the country, covered up the mortal threat of coronavirus, and 191,000 people and counting are dead. Tonight, why Donald Trump's failure is exponentially worse than we ever imagined, what it means for our fight against the pandemic, and what it means for the race to defeat Donald Trump.
While this deadly disease ripped through our nation, he failed to do his job on purpose.
All that and Stacey Abrams on protecting the election when All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Well, he knew. He's lied to us, he's browbeat us, he's circulated insane conspiracy theories, and he has done the worst job managing a crisis of any president since Herbert Hoover. And we already know the reality. We see it every day, every night. We document it on the show. And that is that the United States has 4% of the world's population and 20% of the world's coronavirus cases and deaths. And we know that in large part is because the president has completely bungled the response and then gaslit us all about it. But with Donald Trump, there is always the question, of how much it is sheer incompetence and how much is malevolence. It's always a mixture of the two, but the most charitable reading of the president's actions during this pandemic, this catastrophe, as we race towards 200,000 deaths, is that Donald Trump is just in over his head. In a fundamental way, because of his psychological makeup, his narcissism, his short attention span, he is just constitutionally incapable, literally can't do the job that we need him to do. It's like former First Lady Michelle Obama said last month in her speech at the Democratic Convention, he simply cannot be who we need him to be. It is what it is. And honestly, that has been a large part of the way I thought about it all. Not all of it, but a big part of how I interpreted these actions as I have watched all this unfold. But tonight, we have evidence that it is even worse, much, much worse than incompetence. We have proof, bedrock proof that he knew. We have tapes of him confirming our worst suspicions about Donald Trump and his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. He knew what he was doing. He knew how bad the virus was. He understood it amazingly, and then he lied and he covered it up and he made it all worse. It's a scandal of epic proportions, on the plane of weapons of mass destruction or the secret bombing of Cambodia. I mean, arguably the worst cover-up in American history. And we know this thanks to the newly revealed reporting by Washington Post associate editor Bob Woodward, of course famous for breaking open the Watergate scandal, along with Carl Bernstein back in 1972. Woodward conducted 18 on-the-record interviews with the president between December and July of this year for his new book called Rage, coming out next week. Today he released some of the audio recordings of those interviews, and they are just infuriating, both in what's said and also, I might add, that we're just learning about them now. Take a listen to what the president said on February 7th. Keep in mind, this is very early in the crisis here in the U.S. Hadn't really penetrated American consciousness. There was still hope it could be contained in China at that point. Even the WHO thought that might be possible. This is when we should have been building a testing regime and preparing for the onslaught. This is more than 2 weeks before Dr. Nancy Messonnier at the CDC famously warned us all to prepare our lives to be disrupted. Remember, she talked about remote schooling, and we all went, what? And her warning drew a heavy rebuke from Trump's White House. Listen to what Trump had to say 2 weeks before.
It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. The touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. This is more deadly. This is 5 per. This is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff.
It goes through the air, and it is more deadly than the flu. That's what the president was saying in private on February 7th. This is what he said in public to the American people the very same day.
I just spoke to President Xi last night, and we're working on the problem, the virus. It's a very tough situation, but I think he's going to handle it. I think he's handled it really well. We're helping wherever we can.
Not a big deal. That's what he said the exact same day he told Bob Woodward the virus was airborne and deadlier than flu. Here's what the president said just a few weeks after that.
I asked the various doctors, I said, is this just like flu? Because people die from the flu. And this is very unusual. And it is a little bit different, but in some ways it's easier, and in some ways it's a little bit tougher. But we have it so well under control. I mean, we really have done a very good job.
The president had known for weeks at that point that the coronavirus was, according to the estimates that he was told, 5 times deadlier than the flu. Now listen to this next damning piece of evidence from his March 19th interview with Bob Woodward.
Now it's turning out it's not just old people, Bob, but just today and yesterday some startling facts came out. It's not just old
Yeah, exactly.
young people, to plenty of young people. I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic.
Oh, Donald Trump never wants to create a panic about the Antifa super soldiers and MS-13 coming to your door to kill you. No, of course he likes to calm people down. No, he knows it's not just old people. That's March 19th. It's young people, too. And he tells Bob Woodward that he likes to play it down. He'd spent months since telling us all, including the last few weeks, that young people don't have anything to worry about. Remember, March 19th, it's young people, too. But no, Donald Trump wants young people back out in the football field. Get the college players back out there. These statements, the president, it's like the flu, nothing to worry about. It's going to go away. They were lies. They weren't just mistakes. The president knew better and lied. Joe Biden summed it up pretty well this afternoon.
He lied to the American people. He knowingly and willingly lied about the threat it posed to the country for months. He had the information. He knew how dangerous it was. And while this deadly disease ripped through our nation, he failed to do his job on purpose. It was a life and death betrayal of the American people. It's beyond despicable. It's a dereliction of duty. It's a disgrace.
Failed to do his job on purpose. Pretty good bumper sticker. It's not just that Donald Trump's leadership has been absent here. I mean, this is the thing that is so remarkable. It's not just that he's been absent or that he's been incompetent or bumbling, right? I mean, that's what people said about Herbert Hoover. I mean, the president has been actively working against public health, against American safety and well-being. He has been on the side of the virus. He has been colluding with what he calls the invisible enemy. It would have been better if he took a long vacation starting in February and just spent the rest of the year golfing, as I suggested in March, or if he resigned, as I called for back in June. But instead, he has willfully taken action to lie to us, and through those lies, to get tens of thousands of Americans killed. Tens of thousands of Americans killed, and it's still happening. And there is no way around that conclusion, as awful as it is to say. And even though there really is no way around what the president did, today NBC News White House correspondent Jeff Bennett had to remind the White House that everything Donald Trump said is on tape.
So there's a long litany of praise from Dr. Fauci, and you're referencing something he allegedly told Bob Woodward.
It's on tape. It's on tape, Kaylee.
Well, I'm reading to you what Dr. Fauci has said.
Allegedly, it's on tape. Yes, it is on tape. I'm joined now by Jeff Bennett. Jeff, how has this landed today for someone that covers this White House and is in that room from time to time? How has this landed?
I tell you what, Chris, the thing that has stuck with me since this revelation, since the Washington Post first reported that audio, has been that for months we have been reporting on what we've called the mixed messaging coming from this White House as it relates to the coronavirus crisis. And today we found out that no, it wasn't so much mixed messaging, it was deliberate deceit. The president today admitted that, yes, I was trying to downplay the threat because I didn't want people to panic. It was more than that. It was a knowing misleading. The president, according to Bob Woodward's accounting, was warned at the end of January by his national security advisor that this pandemic would be the biggest threat to his presidency. That is something to make alarm bells ring for any president. But yet, 10 days later, he's speaking in great, surprising detail to Bob Woodward about how this disease is highly communicable, it's dangerous, it's airborne. 2 weeks after that, he's telling the American people it'll go away like a miracle. Come April, when it's hotter out, this disease won't be a thing. Don't worry about it. It's just like handling the flu. And more than what the president said, really, the bigger issue here is what he did not do. We now know that February, when the president was saying these things, saying one thing to Bob Woodward in private on the record and saying a very different thing to the American people, we know that there was the disaster related to testing. There were the PPE shortages. Yep. There was the additional disaster with the sort of stop and start contact tracing efforts. And there have been studies by Columbia University that if this administration had put social distancing measures in place just a week earlier, that could have saved 36,000 lives. And the things that the president said in private about children, I think, are particularly heinous and nefarious. To say that, oh, it's not just old people, it's young people too, in private, on the record. But then to turn around and talk to his friends at Fox News and say, you know, young people are really immune to this. There are now roughly 500,000 kids in this country who have been diagnosed with COVID. At least 100 of them have died, Chris. I mean, that to your point, you're right. It is infuriating. There is no other word for it.
You know, you raised such a good point here. You mentioned the reporting about Robert O'Brien, who's the national security advisor, in January 28th, saying this will be the biggest national security threat you will face in your presidency. This is going to be the roughest thing you face. What that highlights to me, and what his communication on February 7th highlights to me is, look, we know the president watches a lot of Fox News. We know that his information sources can be pretty dubious and sketchy. We know that. We also know that he has access to the entire power of the U.S. government to brief him on things, right? There are thousands and thousands of extremely sophisticated people inside the national security apparatus, inside the public health apparatus, who can go to the president and say, look, these are the reports we're getting from Wuhan. This is what we're learning. And what's so striking about this is that it did get to him. It's not like it didn't get to him. It's not like he was just watching too much Hannity. Like, it actually did get to him. It actually landed a little bit, which is in some ways surprising. And then he actively covered it up.
Yeah, and the other thing, and that's a great point that you make, and I'll just build on that and say today the president was speaking as if this was all retrospective about how he handled, in past tense, the coronavirus. Well, we are 6 months into this, at least, and as I stand here and talk to you, there is still no national testing strategy. There's no national mask mandate. Yeah. There's no national school reopening strategy. So this is a persistent problem. Right? And one of the reasons why there has been this patchwork approach where states are doing their own thing and red states opened up quickly and then we saw this resurgence in the virus is because, one, the president knowingly misled, but two, early on in this process, this administration made a decision that they didn't want to be held responsible for the problem, so it was easier to push it off onto governors. And that's not a partisan statement, that is a statement of fact.
Yeah, that's right. And now that there's some more dimensionality to that in terms of understanding why they did that, because they understood how bad it was going to be, according to the reporting at least, and the tapes of the President Jeff Bennett, who's always doing fantastic work for us there in the White House. Thank you for making some time with us tonight.
Good to see you, buddy.
Now to get his reaction to Donald Trump intentionally lying about the threat of the virus as it was sweeping the country and continues to rage. I'm joined by Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia. Senator, your reaction to hearing the president speak so plainly some of the basic, most important and terrifying truths about the virus that early?
Well, Chris, I think we already knew this is probably one of the greatest domestic political failures in the history of the United States. The mishandling of COVID that has led the U.S. to have such a unprecedentedly high death toll compared to other nations, and economic devastation so much more damaging than other nations. We were sort of chalking it up to a president who is an anti-science, narcissist, ignoramus. But what we learned today is that he actually understood how bad it was going to be and decided to see if he could lie his way out of it. And that just calls to mind so many other fatal missteps in our history when presidents have tried to lie to the American public, and there's been great suffering. But it's one thing to do damage to institutions. It's another thing to do damage that causes the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans. My wife and I both had coronavirus. We know 4 people who've died of coronavirus. The death toll is unacceptably high. The economic devastation is unacceptably high. And this president knew it was going to be bad and tried to sweet talk his way out of it. It's infuriating.
You know, one thing that this caused me to remember is the fact that, you know, in February, there were briefings happening about this. I mean, again, the U.S. government is one of the most powerful entities in the world, right? It's got incredible resources. There were briefings on Capitol Hill. I remember Chris Murphy coming out of a briefing and tweeting and saying, look, this stuff, there is not adequate, sufficient planning. I remember, of course, we know notoriously Richard Burr was in a briefing on it and then sold a bunch of stocks and is apparently being in...
January 24th was the first briefing we had. And we had members in that briefing who then went out and said, the Trump team is doing great, but then they sold stocks, Richard Burr, Kelly Loeffler. They readjusted their portfolios to show that they were afraid of it. President Trump knew how bad it was going to be, and others of his cronies and inside circle knew how it was going to be, knew how bad it was going to be, but they were telling the American public, telling Congress, telling the press it's going away. There's a few cases. We thought it was incompetence, and we saw that at the time, that it was at least incompetence because we never accepted him downplaying it, but what we now know is that it was lying.
How does this change anything now? I mean, it doesn't in some ways, but I guess the question is, what is your sense of what your job is as a member of the U.S. Senate over this next stretch? Because what I find maddening is watching us just go around on this disaster carousel where we sort of pass the same landmarks time and time again. You know, now we're getting stories about the colleges. Look, there's outbreaks in colleges. Well, no duh, there are outbreaks in colleges. Like, are we going to go through another wave of this?
I mean, 250,000 people go to a motorcycle rally in South Dakota, and then they're super spreaders. Who would have thought it? I mean, it's the number of people who are willing to follow this guy like lemmings off a cliff is shocking. We had a hearing today in the Health Committee about vaccine development. That was an informative hearing. Obviously, no vaccine should be out until it's both safe and effective. And a key competitor for one of the vaccines yesterday had to pull back because of some concerns about side effects for one of their subjects in this test. But we want the vaccine to be out and distributed. But how can we trust a White House to do a fair assessment of the science and a fair distribution plan when they've been lying to the American public? I pointed out at the hearing today, the White House has been unwilling to set a daily testing goal for the country. I had to drag out of our testing czar, Brett Giroir, in May, that to reopen the economy safely and school safely by the beginning of September, we needed to be doing between 1.2 and 1.3 and 1.7 million tests a day. At our best, we've done 900,000 tests a day. We're 60% of the way there to what the administration has said we should be. So we've just got to keep the spotlight on the testing gap and try to get it up with funding. And we've got to keep the spotlight on the White House basically lying to the American public. I mean, I was 16 when President Nixon resigned. It was an administration of lies. I saw a president lie our way into an unnecessary war with Iraq that did so much damage to our own troops, but also to peace in the Middle East, security and stability in the Middle East. This is a set of lies that has killed tens of thousands of Americans with no showing of remorse, no showing of maybe we should have done it differently. I just hope Americans can understand. We can make mistakes, but I hope Americans can understand that we can still look in the mirror and acknowledge when we've made a mistake and then try to improve upon it.
Senator Tim Kaine of the Commonwealth of Virginia, thank you for your time tonight.
Absolutely, Chris.
Ahead, the president is on tape admitting he intentionally downplayed the severity of the pandemic, what this moment means as the country nears 200,000 lives lost after this.